She's the spiritual leader known for her best-selling books like A Return to Love. Marianne Williamson has turned heads for decades, grabbing the attention of influential people all over the world, including Oprah. Well, now she's taking her leadership even further. Marianne is running for the Democratic nomination in the 2024 presidential election, and we're chatting with her all about it. This is Advocate Now. Well, you are, of course, running for the Democratic nomination in the 2024 presidential election. And what I love about you is that you go beyond the surface with issues. You question things at the root level, and you sparked a conversation around morality-driven politics. So I want to start with that. How do you define morality, and why would you consider it a political matter?
I think that there is within every human being a core of conscience, ethics, that place where we know that you behave in a certain way because it's the right thing to do. And I think most of us realize that your life works better when you do what you can to adhere to that. Public policy should be no different, because politics and public policy are an expression of our collective behavior. So in our collective behavior, as well as our journey as individuals, when we try to be good people, when we try to behave with compassion, ethics, conscience, life works better. And when we don't, all kinds of chaos and unworkable solutions are produced. That's true in politics as much as in anything else. And it's been over the last 50 years that there's been introduced into the field of politics and public discourse the idea that a kind of soulless economics that lacks any kind of ethical consideration is somehow a good thing, is now given primacy over the health and the safety and the well-being of people and animals and our children and our planet and our communities. And we've got to stop this. We've got to course correct. This is a very dangerous trajectory. And I think most of us know this now.
Yeah, when people discuss politics or attempt to justify their own political beliefs, would you say that it can sometimes be a means for allowing themselves to separate from their moral compasses?
Well, not necessarily, because I know people who very much would agree with everything that I just said in terms of their personal lives, and to even demonstrate that in their personal lives, but think that that should be separated from our collective behavior, politics, economics, etc. I simply disagree. But we want to stay away from thinking that any of us have the moral high ground based on our politics. We want to stay away from that.
You have been known as a spiritual leader. You were Oprah's spiritual advisor. When people try to write off spiritual leaders as crazy, I truly believe that it stems from fear, and they might not even realize that they're afraid because they're living unconsciously. And you have said that love is what we're born with, fear is what we learn. What do you think people are so afraid of?
Well, first of all, anybody who says that is displaying a remarkable lack of knowledge about American history. The abolitionist movement emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. Many of the women who were the leaders in the suffragette movement were Quakers. Dr. King, of course, was a Baptist preacher. So whenever there's been a major social justice movement in American history, there's been a deep embedding of that movement within religious and spiritual circles. So that's number one. Number two, well, I have two things to say. First of all, somebody might want to take a good look at the second inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln, because the whole thing is his conversation about the Civil War in the context of biblical understanding. And the second thing about that is the spiritual underpinnings of the Declaration of Independence, which is our mission statement. It begins with the concept that all men are created equal. It doesn't even say all men are equal. It says all men are created equal. And then it says God gave us inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the founding of this country is grounded in principles which are higher than merely transactional political values.
And one of my favorite things that you've ever written is that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Why do you think so many of us fear our own power?
The idea of our fear of shining, I mean, you and I as women certainly know that. Sometimes there is the tendency in all of us, I'll just keep my head down. If I say what I really think, I might not get approved of. If I try to do what I really want to do, somebody might slap me down. People who come from any kind of a minority particularly understand this, but there is a level on which we all feel it, no matter who we are. Because in what talking about that book, there's an ego mind inside all of us, which is our temptation to play small, keep it constricted, a fear of what might happen if we make a break for it and express ourselves. Now, I think that the most we can do, and that's a lot, and that's included in that paragraph, is do it anyway. And when you do, yes, there will be some people who slap you down. There will be some people who that you think you are. And there will be other people who go, yeah, thank you for demonstrating that. And I think particularly for us as women, that's important, because I think we all are looking for someone else to display something that we think, well, wait a minute, if she could do it, or he could do it, or they could do it, it opens up a space of possibility for everyone.
Well, you have been open in saying that you're not a politician. What was the catalyst for you running? And was there any sort of divine knowing or intervention that led you there?
Well, my career, early in my career, the AIDS crisis burst onto the scene, and I was living in Los Angeles. So from the very, very beginning, I found myself deeply involved in a crisis situation, people whose lives were in deep despair. And out of that grew an entire trajectory of my career involvement, in which I've been up close and personal with people whose lives were who were going through very dark times. It might be that they were diagnosed with a critical illness. It might be that somebody's child was addicted to heroin. They didn't know it. It might be that a loved one died. And I, not only through my personal work with people, but also founding nonprofits and so forth, felt that this was a meaningful life and a meaningful, life. But I also felt in the first years of my career that it felt somehow that people whose lives were in serious trouble were the exception and not the rule in American society. Now what started to happen, and I've seen this gradually emerge as almost a cultural phenomenon over the last 20 years, is that people who are dealing with deep anxiety, despair, whose lives are falling apart on some level, almost seem more like the rule than the exception. And I began to realize something's going on here. It's not just the proverbial acts of God, it could happen, should happen to anybody's life. This was something more. I began to see that the lack of healthcare, I began to see that lack of economic opportunity, lack of educational opportunity, things that have to do with large political, economic, and social forces were causing damage to people, pain, conflict, chaos in people's lives that could not be addressed by charitable or counseling purposes alone. They call it a mental health crisis, but we have to ask ourselves, why though? Why are so many people chronically depressed, chronically anxious, chronically upset, and having such a hard time? And when you do look, you go, oh, wow. And then for someone like myself, I found myself counseling a lot of politicians. And I began to realize at a certain point, we can't just try to convince those people. We have to replace those people in those places of power, because the forces which make so much suffering inevitable are so baked into the cake at this point.
I'm Sonia Baghdadi. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.